My name is Pam McNerney, and I'm one of your event hosts this evening. We have a few more event hosts back there and two event hosts in training. So welcome to them too. I'd like to welcome Tom Santopietro, who is here tonight to talk with us about Audrey Hepburn, A Life of Beautiful Uncertainty. This tribute captures the elegance, complexity, and enduring influence of a beloved icon. It features rare photographs, untold stories, and insights into her life on and off the screen, from Hollywood's golden age to her humanitarian legacy, which I did not know about. So I'm really interested in hearing about that. The book allows us to discover the woman behind the legend. Tom is the author of 9 previous books, including The Sound of Music Story, The Importance of Penny Barbara, Sinatra in Hollywood, The Godfather Effect, Why to Kill a Mockingbird Matters, the New York Times Editor's Choice Considering Doris Day, and most recently, The Way We Were, a making of a romantic classic. Over the past 30 years, he has managed 3 dozen Broadway shows. So we do have some copies left of Audrey Hepburn. We have a few copies of The Way We Were. Those will be on sale, and there will be a signing afterwards. So please join me in welcoming Tom.
First, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. I thought I'm gonna kind of give you what's the Cliff Notes version of Audrey's life, and so that you get an idea and of what her life was like, what led me to write the book, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about the real woman underneath the facade. And so I think the reason why I wanted to write the book and why I hit upon Audrey as a subject was because she really led 3 lives in one. She was an Academy Award-winning movie star. She was a fashion icon whose influence remains to today. I don't know if any of you saw the cover photo of Audrey in that dress was exactly copied by Ivanka Trump at an inaugural ball. And so, the influence continues. And the third part of her life was as this incredible humanitarian activist on behalf of UNICEF. So I thought that was all really interesting to explore. And the fact that she walked away from this worldwide fame really interested me a lot. So, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But it all really started with her childhood, because 2 things happened in her childhood. The first one was when she was 6 years old, her father walked out on the family, never to return. He was gone one day. And so Audrey was living with her mother, who was aristocratic, came from, she was Baroness von Heemstra. She was a pretty formidable character. And so Audrey was trying to cope with that. She could not make sense of it, that her father had disappeared. And she said, as an adult, as a film star, she said nothing in her life, including the multiple miscarriages she had, was ever as horrible as her father leaving and deserting the family. So it played a big role in how she led her life. And the second event in her childhood was the fact when World War II broke out. And her mother, Audrey, they had sent her to school in England under the mistaken impression that her father was over there after the split. And they thought her father would go visit her, but she never did. She's a little girl, she's 10 years old. And her mother then made the decision, as the war was breaking out, she said, England's going to be invaded. The Netherlands won't be. Audrey, come back to the Netherlands. And of course, the Netherlands was invaded. And Audrey, when I was researching the book, there's this extraordinary scene where Audrey's 10 years old and her mother comes in her bedroom in the morning, rips back the shades and says, get up, the war started. So she lived under Nazi rule and it was horrible. And she almost starved to death. It's a big reason why she was always so skinny, when the war ended, she was 16 years old and she weighed 90 pounds. And they have said that if the war lasted 2 more weeks, she would have died. So because that last winter in the Netherlands was so horrible, that last winter of the war in 45, that she was reduced to eating tulip bulbs. That's all she had to eat. So what happened was her lifelong dream during her adolescence had been to be a dancer, ballerina. And at the end of the war, she got a scholarship to England for ballet school. And after a little bit of time there, she was called in one day and they said to her, "You're too tall to ever be a prima ballerina. You've missed too much training because of the war. You'll be lucky if you're in the corps de ballet." And so she felt devastated. She said she felt like her world had ended. And what she did, this was the thing, we all think of her as being so elegant and floating above it all. She said, "I need to make money." Her mother had gone from a baroness to penniless, and they were in London, and the mother took every job she could find, and Audrey started modeling. And she was do print modeling. And then she started, she got little tiny bits in films. And the first time she was approached, I mean tiny bits, 30 seconds. And the parts got a little bigger, not much. And the director would say, "Well, I want you to do this, and read these lines." And she would say, "Well, that seems like a bad idea. I'm not an actress. I don't want to ruin your movie." And they would say, "Well, no, you have something." So what happened is she's doing little bits, and then she's cast in this pretty bad movie called Monte Carlo Baby. And right, the title tells you everything. And they filmed it in English and in French. Audrey's fluent in French. And one of the things people don't realize, she was so incredibly smart. She spoke 6 languages fluently. 6. So she was the one cast member who was filming in both languages. And she was fooling around on the set one day, and the novelist Colette saw her, and Colette said, "Come here," in French, and they started conversing, and Colette said, "I think you should be Gigi, the famous character, in the Broadway production based on my novel." And Audrey's response was very typical, and she said, "That seems like a bad idea. I've never been on a stage." But Colette said, "No, you have the right look and feel for the role." And so Audrey is preparing for her Broadway debut. And at the same time, the word circulates that they're going to make a movie called Roman Holiday. And Audrey is called in to audition. There were, I think, 5 actresses they filmed. And the really interesting thing is she's not experienced at all, because these are tiny bits she's done. And at the end, she read the scenes. And then what they did was very purposely, she went to change her clothes back. They kept the cameras running. They didn't tell her. She came back out after she had changed, and they started asking her about her life during the war and what it was like under the Nazis. And what she said was so heartfelt and so emotional, they thought, "Oh, she really has something on camera." So they're interested in her. She goes to New York to star in Gigi. At first, she's not good because she doesn't have stage experience, but they said she had star authority. She was the only one you wanted to watch on the stage, which of course is true of all real stars. And so she grows in the part. Gigi opens on Broadway. She becomes an overnight sensation. She's nominated for a Tony Award. And that's when they announced that she's going to be the star of Roman Holiday. So she's now kind of the toast of the town. And she worked nonstop. I mean, she was doing live television. She was doing Broadway. She was about to start this feature film. And what happened with Roman Holiday is, she was the perfect person for the role. because they wanted somebody who was European, they didn't want an American. She was aristocratic, but very approachable at the same time. And she films the movie and wins an Academy Award as Best Actress in her first feature film, her first starring role. And she then returns to Broadway and does a play called Undine and wins the Tony Award. So within a month, she wins the Academy Award and the Tony Award. And here's what her mother, the formidable Baroness, said to her daughter. She said, you know, it's remarkable what you have accomplished with these awards, considering how little talent you have. But the thing is, Audrey didn't take offense by this. She felt it was a spur for her. And so she makes Sabrina with Humphrey Bogart, and she falls in love with William Holden while they're making the movie, and really falls in love. And William Holden wants to leave his wife, and they are talking seriously about marriage. And then William Holden announces that he can't have any more children. And that stopped the romance, because what Audrey Hepburn wanted more than anything in life was to have children. And so it relates back to her father deserting her and not having a sense of a childhood. And so Audrey, while all of this is going on, in terms of her personal life, she falls in love with a man named James Hansen. But she realizes in the midst of the engagement that it's never going to work out, because Audrey is still focused on her career. And the fast forward that I like, that I include in the book, is that when they ran into each other 30 years later at the opening of a hotel somewhere in the Middle East, James Hansen by now is a billionaire with a B. And Audrey looks at him and she says, well, haven't we both done well for ourselves? Which I just love. But after she broke up with James Hansen, she met the actor and sometime director Mel Ferrer, and they fall and get married. And what's interesting about it, that I liked researching with the book, is Mel Ferrer was almost 14 years older than Audrey. And so you see, she's looking for a father figure. And so people immediately start saying, oh, Mel Ferrer's dominating her, he's making all the decisions. But Audrey kind of wanted that. She wanted that sense of protection. She was still carrying what for her were the scars from childhood. And although the marriage, as probably many of you know, broke up, they were married from the mid-50s until 68. Audrey in later years said to her son, Sean, whom I was lucky enough to interview at length for the book, Audrey said to Sean, your father was the producer of my career. She always gave him credit for the good career advice he had given her. So Audrey marries Mel in the mid-50s, and Audrey has become a huge box office star. She got another Academy Award nomination for Sabrina. She makes Funny Face with Fred Astaire. It's her lifelong dream to dance with Fred Astaire. She makes War and Peace. I mean, she's really on a roll. And it becomes tricky for Mel Ferrer, because no matter what he does, he's overshadowed by Audrey. She's one of the biggest stars in the world. And still, with all of the acclaim, really all she wanted was to be a mother. And so her son Sean is born in 1960, and she's over the moon, happy. She doesn't really care about making movies, but she's still so in demand. And so they come to Audrey and they say, we'd like you to star in the movie version of Breakfast at Tiffany's. And the really fun fact is Truman Capote being both the talent and the incredible self-promoter that he was, says, well, Audrey Hepburn and I are very good friends, but she's absolutely wrong for the role. I don't want her starring in my movie. All of a sudden, it's his movie. And he says, which I found really fascinating, there's only one actress who can play the role, and that's Marilyn Monroe. And he claims that Marilyn worked up 2 scenes for him, and he only wants Marilyn in the role, but the producers don't want Marilyn Monroe. And they want Audrey Hepburn, who wants to stay home with her son. But the role is, she knows it's a great role, and she signs on, and that's her signature role. It's what everybody associates with her. And so she comes and they do location filming in New York, and then they're filming in Hollywood. And at the end of the filming, they edit it and they have a sneak preview. And the sneak preview goes pretty well, but they're doing a postmortem after it. And one of the Paramount executives stands up and says, well, the movie's pretty good, but you got to get rid of that awful song, Moon River. Get rid of it. And Audrey Hepburn did something so out of character for her because she was so gentle. She stood up and she said, the song goes over my dead body. And so they kept the song in. And of course, it won the Academy Award and became signature. And then the sort of next highlight in Audrey's life was My Fair Lady. And as many of you probably know, it became unbelievably controversial because everybody was saying, oh, Audrey stole the Julie Andrews role. But here's something I learned from researching the book. The really interesting thing is Audrey Hepburn actually gave a dinner party for Hollywood executives trying to convince them to cast Julie Andrews. And the thing was, Julie Andrews' Mary Poppins had not been filmed or released, so she was a Broadway star. But they were very uneasy. She was not a movie star at all. They didn't know how she'd read on the screen because, think about Ethel Merman and Mary Martin, who were big Broadway stars but never translated to film. So they were very uneasy, and they said, Jack Warner said, I'm not casting Julie Andrews. It doesn't matter what anybody says. And that's when Audrey said, I would really like to play that role. So they film, and the whole time they're filming, they're telling Audrey Hepburn, you've recorded the songs, we're going to use your voice, it's going to be your voice. And halfway through filming one day on the set, they say to her, you're being dubbed. Every one of your songs is being dubbed. And this shows you what Audrey Hepburn was like. This is the biggest temperamental fit Audrey Hepburn ever threw, which was they told her that. She said, oh, that was her whole remark. And she walked off the set for the one and only time in her career, because she'd been lied to for months by this point. She came back the next day and she said to everybody on the set, I'd like to apologize for my wicked behavior yesterday. I mean, she was so good. That's what I kept discovering when I was researching it. And so the movie comes out, and the movie's a huge hit, but Audrey's not nominated for an Academy Award, and Julie Andrews wins for Mary Poppins. And here's the interesting thing, that it's the fun of looking at all these big movies again. I mean, of course, Audrey Hepburn can't sing as well as Julie Andrews. Very few can. But the whole second half of My Fair Lady, people forget this. She's already turned into a lady, but she says, what's to become of me? Because she doesn't fit in with her flower selling friend. She's too elegant, and she's not a real aristocrat. So she has nowhere she belongs. And when Audrey Hepburn, if you ever look at the film again, says that, it's almost painful how vulnerable she is when she says that, because that's who she was in real life. Where was she going to fit in when her father deserted the family? Where was she going to fit in as her marriage to Mel Ferrer is going downhill? And when I interviewed her son, Sean, he actually pointed out that part of the movie to me, and he said, Tom, when she says, where do I fit in? I said, "You're seeing my mother." He said, "That was a cry from the heart." And so, while of course she can't sing as well as Julie Andrews, I'm making the point, because it's fun to sort of stir things up a little bit, that when Julie Andrews says that, you know Julie Andrews is going to be fine. She's going to clap her hands and she's going to say, "Now let's get on with business," which is why she's great playing a nanny in The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins. So there's a difference between their star persona. And so after My Fair Lady comes out, the marriage with Mel is really falling apart. And Audrey makes one last great movie in 1967, Wait Until Dark, if any of you have seen it, where she plays a blind woman. And that movie holds up so well. And here's the great quote about it that I put in the book. The novelist Stephen King, the king of, all horror novels, said, "Wait Until Dark is the scariest movie I've seen in my whole life." Because you are terrorized on Audrey's behalf. So she makes that. She makes a fantastic movie called Two for the Road with Albert Finney. Really, really great movie. And she and Mel get divorced. And Audrey starts stepping away from Hollywood. She wants to spend time with her son Sean, who by now is 7 years old. And she meets Andrea Dotti, an Italian psychiatrist, and they fall in love and they get married. So we're now in 1970. And at first, it's a very happy marriage, and then it quickly falls apart because while Audrey is still spending some time in Switzerland where she had a house, and Andrea was in Rome, every day in the newspapers is a different photo of Andrea Dotti with a beautiful 24-year-old woman on the town. He was serially unfaithful to Audrey Hepburn. So that starts going downhill, even though they have a son together whom they both love. And all of a sudden, Audrey Hepburn, while all of this is going on, she goes 9 years without making a movie. That started to really interest me. Like, you're one of the biggest stars in the world, but that was not her focus. Her focus was on her sons. That's who she wanted to spend time with. And her son said she felt going to an award show, getting all dressed up and being honored was a loss, because what she wanted to do was cook dinner for her sons and stay home. So I thought, psychologically, I want to kind of delve into it, which I tried to do in the book. And so after 9 years, she goes back to the movies and makes a movie called Robin and Marion with Sean Connery. And one of the reasons why she did it was that Sean was 16 by then. And both of her sons said, "If you can make a movie with James Bond, go back to work." So she went back and made the movie. And the marriage to Andrea could not survive what was happening. And they get divorced. And it's at this point that she not only makes an occasional film, but one of her cousins says to her, "I'm very involved with UNICEF. Would you come to our big fundraiser in Macau?" And she had always turned down these requests, but she went and she gave a speech as a fundraiser. And she was so unbelievably effective that he said to her, "I want to introduce you to the higher ups at UNICEF." And she made a couple more speeches, which were incredibly successful. And they said, "We want to make you special ambassador." And she said, "I'll do it." And this was the most amazing part of her life, because it took over her life. She would do a very occasional movie. But on behalf of UNICEF, this was not like, standing in Tiffany's at a press conference saying, "Please support UNICEF." She was flying to the most desolate countries in the world, house on the ground. She would hold dying children in her arms because not only did she have this unbelievable empathy, but she knew that if the film crews would film her being so forceful on behalf of the children, she knew that millions of dollars could be raised because UNICEF is not funded by the United Nations, which I didn't know. And so this became her life. And it's really extraordinary the extent to which she would do it and fly to unbelievable countries. So Henry Kissinger at one point says, in a kind of rolling the eyes fashion, Bangladesh is a basket case. And Audrey Hepburn says, if he's calling it a basket case, that's where I'm going. And she went to Bangladesh and she said, it's not just showing up, it's reading briefing papers, it's knowing what's going on in the country, it's knowing why they have these horrible conditions. And so when it got to, she's doing this, and it starts to take a real toll on her health. And she has to have every shot known to mankind because she's going into places with virtually no health care, no infrastructure. And the last trip she made for UNICEF was to Somalia. And she gets on the plane. Now, these are not jet planes. These are like rickety little things that are taking her there. And they give her a flak jacket. And she puts on the flak jacket. And they say, no, you don't put the flak jacket on. You sit on it because they're going to be firing guns into the plane. And we have no guarantee you'll land safely. But she was so determined. And you see the toll it took on her. And her son Sean said he thinks part of the reason why her health deteriorated so rapidly is because she had just been through so much, the physical strain, the emotional strain, but it was what she cared about. Even as she's getting all these lifetime honors from Hollywood and in London, it was the children that she cared about. And what happened is that she gets cancer and they realize there's nothing that can be done. And so I'm going to back up because this story, I just was amazed to hear this. The last thing she did on the camera was she did a series for PBS, and it was called Gardens of the World. And she went to the most beautiful gardens all around the world. And she loved gardening, had a big garden at home. And so it was sort of a perfect fit. And as we all know, PBS has no money. So this was not My Fair Lady with a $20 million budget. This was, $1.98. And so they had very little money for her for wardrobe and hair. And so Audrey Hepburn says to them, if you will buy me an iron and an ironing board, I will take care of everything myself. Now, that's unbelievable because just think of any movie star today saying something like that. And then the young woman who was the production assistant on the show said that Audrey Hepburn said to her, give me your clothes. I'm going to iron your clothes too. And the production assistant said, if you do that, I'll get fired. You can't do that to me. And Audrey Hepburn insisted on it. I mean, that's the sort of person she was as she's this enormous star. And so she's getting these lifetime honors, but it's very clear that she is going downhill rapidly. And she wants to go back to Switzerland because she knew she was going to die. And so here's another thing I discovered that really struck me. Sean said that when she was on her deathbed, that he said to her, do you have any regrets? And she said, no. And then she thought about it for a minute. And she said, actually, I have one regret. I regret that I never met the Dalai Lama. And she said, because with his compassion, his wisdom, his humanity, he's the closest we have to the truly spiritual on earth. And I tried to build the book to this point because she had started, as a little girl with her mother. She was a Christian Scientist. And Audrey had turned away from formal religion, and yet she was this incredibly spiritual person with her work for UNICEF. And so, just to give you a little personal anecdote about it that I do, hopefully you'll find interesting. So, Audrey says this: I finished my book. The book, to save costs, is going to be printed overseas. It's going to be printed in China. And so they start printing this book. And then the printer goes back to my publisher and says, we have to stop. We won't print Tom's book. And the publisher understandably said, oh, why not? And the answer was, because Audrey Hepburn mentions the Dalai Lama and Tibet. And if we print that book, our business will be shut down. So I thought, well, I've now been censored by Beijing. So, the great thing is that she had a sense of completion at the end of her life because, she was only 63 when she died. And the sense of completion was the very last feature film she made was a movie called Always, directed by Steven Spielberg. And she's just a cameo role, and she is so unbelievably good in her 5 minutes on screen. She's actually grown as an actress. So, and she kind of knew that. And Spielberg is praising her as the, incredible actress that she was. And at the same time, she has, her sons were grown and successful, and she had a sense of spiritual completion because of her work on behalf of UNICEF. And she had overcome the trauma of her childhood. That's why she gave back with UNICEF. And the thing I didn't tell you at the beginning is that not only did her father walk out on her, he was an out and out fascist who spent World War II in jail in England. And her mother had started out as an admirer of the Nazis and finally came to her senses. But what Sean said to me when I interviewed him was, he said, my mother, Audrey, became who she was as a humanitarian in reaction to her parents. So I thought that was really interesting. And on her last Christmas, which was less than a month before she died, she was at home with her family in Switzerland. And with the sense of completion, she said to them, this is the best Christmas of my life, even though they knew she could die at any moment. And when she in fact did die, the family received letters from 4 United States presidents. That is, the extent of her footprint on the world. And when I also interviewed Sean's daughter, Emma, Audrey's granddaughter, who unfortunately never knew her grandmother. Emma was born shortly after Audrey died. But I want to end the talk, and then we'll see the questions, with something that Emma told me. I said, well, how do you grapple with the legacy of your grandmother? Who was she? And Emma said, this is what's startling to me. She said, it's a little unusual when you are walking down the street and you see your grandmother's face on somebody's pocketbook. You have to figure out, how does Emma establish her own identity? But then she said to me, I said, who was your grandmother? And she said, well, my grandmother was the woman in the poem that she asked to be read at that last Christmas, and she asked to be read at her funeral. And so I'm going to read you the poem. You'll be pleased. I didn't write the poem, so, I'm not, but what it was, it's really extraordinary. Back in 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a humorist by the name of Sam Levinson, who would write, it was a very gentle humor, unlike the harsh humor of today. And when Sam Levinson's daughter was born, he wrote a letter to her. And then when his granddaughter was born, he wrote a letter to his granddaughter. And Audrey was so taken with these letters by the gentleness, the humanity of the letters, that she took the two letters and she adapted them into a poem. And so I reprinted the poem in the book, but I want to read it to you now because it gives such a sense of who she was. And you just have to hold on. But this meant so much to her. As I said, it was not only read at the last band of Christmas, but it was read at her funeral. And although this is about women, with a few word changes, it could be about men as well. So Audrey titled this Time-Tested Beauty Tips. And this is who she was as a person. For attractive lips, speak words of kindness. For lovely eyes, seek out the blooming people. For a slim figure, share your food with the hungry. For beautiful hair, let a child run his or her fingers through it once a day. For boys, walk with the knowledge that you never walk alone. People, even more than things, have to be restored, renewed, revived, reclaimed, and redeemed. Never throw out anyone. Remember, if you ever need a helping hand, you'll find one at the end of each of your arms. As you grow older, you will discover that you have two hands, one for helping yourself, the other for helping others. The beauty of a woman is not in the clothes she wears, the figure she carries, or the way she combs her hair. The beauty of a woman must be seen from in her eyes, because that is the doorway to her heart, the place where love resides. The beauty of a woman is not in a facial mold, but the true beauty in a woman is reflected in her soul. It is the caring that she lovingly gives, the passion that she shows, and the beauty of a woman with passing years only grows. And that's really who she was. So I'm going to stop there. And if any of you have questions, I always love questions because I learned something. And hopefully there are a few questions. Do not be shy. You're not getting graded on the questions. Everybody, raise your hands. Hi.
Thank you very much for showing us. As you're writing this book, so when I listen to you, I can't help but compare her a bit to Princess.
That's an interesting comparison, the comparison of Audrey Hepburn to Princess Diana. And I think, to me, there are two real similarities. The first one is, both of them were such fashion icons that years after their deaths, their dresses were auctioned for millions of dollars for charity, which is extraordinary. But I think the bigger similarity between them is that they both, so they're two of the most famous women in the world. And they both realized in their own way that the fame was meaningless unless they could use it to do some good in the world. So with Audrey, it was UNICEF, and with Princess Diana, it was the campaign against landmines, and she was one of the very first to speak out on behalf of the AIDS patients. And the one other person I would put into that category is Elizabeth Taylor with her AIDS activism. And the really interesting thing to me was that I realized when I was researching completely separately, Elizabeth Taylor and Audrey Hepburn used the exact same words, which were, "At last my fame makes sense to me." Audrey was saying it about to use for UNICEF and Elizabeth about AIDS activism. And So it's interesting that you can have all the money and the fame in the world, but ultimately that is not what they took their meaning from these people. Right. Yeah.
Audrey Hepburn, and then this, what did you have to go down?
Well, I think I was really interested that she had those disparate lives, right? Usually I shouldn't say just, but you are an actress. But the fact that she was an Academy Award winning actress and a fashion icon whose influence is felt today, and a humanitarian, and then walked away from it and said, she actually said, I'm not interested in the Audrey Hepburn business. I'm interested in UNICEF and helping these children. And so that, I sort of thought, well, I can have fun with the Hollywood glamour, but there's psychological underpinnings that make her worth investigating. And I did, it happens, I kind of fell in love with her when I was researching the book. You really do. And I say it as a joke, but it's sort of true. I used to think, how do historians write books about Stalin? I don't want that monster in my head for 5 years. So, Audrey was a much nicer person to have in my head. Right, you were there.
You had to choose 2 or 3. I think I want to see My Fair Lady. 2 or 3 of her best movies that might be there.
Well, I would say Breakfast at Tiffany's because it's the most iconic, and it's worth it just for the opening scene when she is standing in front of the Tiffany's window. I would also say Wait Until Dark if you want to be scared out of your mind. And it has a happy ending. And I think that, I think I would probably say Two for the Road, because that movie was made 50 years ago, and everything it says about marriage is still true today. So those are the ones I really like. That's meaning. That's a good question. We had 2 favorite movies, depending on when you asked her. The first one, and I do think it's her greatest performance, is a movie called The Nun Story. I interviewed a film historian, and the film historian said, not only should Audrey Hepburn have won the Academy Award for The Nun Story, she said it's one of the greatest performances ever in Hollywood, because she's wearing a full habit, so the whole performance is just her eyes. That's all it is, and it's extraordinary. And she was the proudest of that. And then the other one she said was My Fair Lady, and she said, because I started with my love of music and dancing, so to make a big musical made her really happy. So, yeah.
Yes, so this is kind of a segue from the Stalin comment you made, but so clearly, I've not read the book, but just listening to you, you clearly, even before you stated that you actually fell in love with her doing the research, but you clearly admire and respect her. So I was wondering if any of the other biographies that you've done, if anyone come even close to that for you?
Oh, the question was about if any of the other books I've written, I had this personal reaction to the subject as being such a good person. That's actually a great question, and here's why, because I just realized this recently. You sit down, you write a book, it always turns out differently than what you think you're going to write when you sit down. And I realized unconsciously, this completed a trilogy of books about major Hollywood stars who were incredibly nice people beloved by their co-stars. And I think, and here are the 3, Audrey Hepburn, Doris Day, and Julie Andrews. All unbelievably nice, all at their peak, the biggest star in the world. And I thought, now, why have I done this trilogy? And I realized that on some level I wasn't even aware of. The world is so upside down these days that I just needed to concentrate on something positive. It's really that kind of basic. And just like I only realized after the fact that I had written a book, a trilogy of books about family. And the first one was The Sound of Music, because that's about family. Second one is about the Godfather, because that is really about family. And you know, I always joke and say the difference between the two families is one solves their problem with show tunes and the other one with machine guns. But and the third one is To Kill a Mockingbird, because that's about family too. So these things you realize, I almost realized after the fact. So thanks for that question.
One more question? Somebody over there?
The question is if Audrey had a favorite leading man. And that's a great question. She really, really liked Gregory Peck from Roman Holiday. I think if she had to pick one, it would have been Albert Finney from Two for the Road. They had a little thing going on during the filming of the movie, and they remained great friends. But all of these co-stars loved her, and I got, shortly before he died, I interviewed Alan Arkin, because he was the bad guy in Winter Dark. And he said to me, she was the most unbelievably nice, gentle person. And he said that 20 years later, she was honored by the Film Society at Lincoln Center. And he hadn't seen her in 20 years. And he went up to her and he said, I have to apologize. It was so horrible to you in the movie. My character was so terrible. And I feel so terrible because you're so wonderful. So, you know, that was how they all felt about it. She was pretty spectacular. So.